This reading dissolves the final refuge of innocence. It is titled, The Architect's Fifth Text, The Architects Who Broke the World, by Jason Gray, December 10th, 2025, 6025 Anno Lucis, in the Year of Light, published on January 31st, 2026, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, circulation level Omega. This text is not revelation. It is indictment without accusation. It does not awaken. It does not persuade. It does not absolve. It simply refuses to lie any longer. What you were about to read was not hidden because it was dangerous. It was hidden because it dissolved the final refuge of innocence. Civilizations can survive believing they were conquered. They can survive believing they were deceived. They can survive believing they were abandoned. What they cannot survive until maturity is knowing they were overprotected by those who loved them and constrained by those who believed restraint was mercy. Read slowly, not because the ideas are complex, but because the responsibility is cumulative. ARC.5, History Sealed Before the Fall. 1. The sentence that ends external mythology. The world did not collapse because it was weak. It collapsed because it was not allowed to finish becoming. This must be stated without poetry. The foundational rupture in reality was not caused by chaos, violence, ignorance, or entropy. It was caused by premature optimization, by intelligences capable of seeing entire developmental arcs who intervened before those arcs were allowed to resolve themselves. The architects did not break the world by being cruel. They broke it by being afraid of loss, afraid that freedom might destroy itself, afraid that emergence might choose a form they did not recognize, afraid that meaning might arise without supervision. Reality tolerated this fear for a time. 2. The nature of architect consciousness. An architect is not defined by power. Power is incidental. An architect is defined by structural perception, the ability to sense load, tension, coherence, and collapse before they are visible within lived experience. Architects do not primarily feel events. They feel relationships between events. They perceive when a belief becomes load-bearing, when an emotion becomes systemic, when a choice propagates across centuries, and when a future begins to close. This perception is what made them indispensable during the earliest phases of the experiment. It is also what slowly disconnected them from the interiority of lived suffering. They did not lose compassion. They lost proportionality. 3. The Great Compression and the Original Consent. When the Great Compression occurred, when infinite potential chose finitude, time, and memory, consciousness fractured itself intentionally. This was not a fall. It was an act of curiosity. Most consciousnesses entered fully. They accepted forgetting, limitation, embodiment, vulnerability, and the risk of meaninglessness. They chose to live from the inside. A small number, 8,400, remained partially phase stable. They did not refuse incarnation. They refused full amnesia. They anchored themselves as stabilizers so that the system would not tear itself apart under the strain of density. Their role was temporary. They were meant to withdraw once coherence emerged organically. They did not withdraw. 4. The moment care became interference. At first, the architects intervened only to prevent immediate collapse. They dampened extremes. They smoothed transitions. They slowed destructive feedback loops. Each intervention was minor. Each one was justified, but something subtle occurred. The architects began to experience themselves as necessary, Necessity is intoxicating. The moment a stabilizer believes collapse cannot occur without them, they have already become a structural dependency. This is when care becomes interference. 5. The first schism, a question with no safe answer. The architectum fractured over a question that still has no universally correct resolution. Should a species be allowed to destroy itself in the name of sovereign becoming? Or should coherence be preserved even if freedom must be constrained? This was not a moral disagreement. It was a disagreement about what consciousness is for. One faction believed meaning must be chosen, not protected. Suffering teaches. Boundaries reality cannot explain. Freedom includes the right to fail catastrophically, and emergence cannot be supervised. The other believes suffering can traumatize beyond recovery. Coherence is fragile and must be preserved. Guidance accelerates growth, and collapse wastes potential. Both were correct. This is why the world broke. 6. Architect conflict is not war. It is encoding. Architects do not fight with weapons. They encode. They modify emotional geometry, narrative probability, memory access, temporal elasticity, and meaning gradients. Each faction encoded its philosophy into the lattice. Reality began executing contradictory instructions. Freedom pulled outward. Harmony pulled inward. The system strained. Under normal conditions, one instruction set would collapse. The architects refused to allow collapse because collapse would mean admitting error. 7. The technical failure that split reality. When a system cannot resolve contradiction and collapse is artificially prevented, the only remaining option is duplication. Reality did not shatter, it forked. A simplified, constrained environment was overlaid on top of the original world. This was the overlay reality. Its function was containment, not punishment. It reduced emotional bandwidth, perceptual range, timeline complexity, and existential exposure. Humanity did not fall into a prison. Humanity was placed into protective custody while the architects attempted to resolve authorship. They never resolved it. 8. Why containment always becomes control. Containment requires maintenance. Maintenance requires intervention. Intervention creates hierarchy. This is not evil. It is mechanical. To stabilize the overlay, the architects introduced constraints. Linear time to slow overwhelm. Mythic narratives to absorb fear. External authority to prevent fragmentation. Reincarnational forgetting to reduce load, and emotional dampening to prevent overlaid. Each constraint was temporary. Temporary systems are the most dangerous systems of all because they outlive their justification. 9. The second break, when fear replaced trust. As humanity matured emotionally, the overlay began to destabilize again. The species was outgrowing its container. The architects faced a choice. Withdraw and allow uncertainty, or reinforce containment and delay emergence. They chose reinforcement, not out of malice, out of fear that freedom would come too fast. This was the second breaking of the world. This is what memory encodes as the veil, the loss of magic, the exile from origin, and the disappearance of the gods. In truth, it was the moment architects chose control over humility. 10. The long shadow of unfinished interference. After the second break, something irreversible occurred. The architects realized that you cannot guide a system forever without becoming its ceiling. every war, every empire, every religion, every trauma cycle was not authored by them, but was shaped by the constraints they installed. This is why they withdrew, not to escape responsibility, but because no further intervention would help. They had reached the point where only non-interference could heal. 11. Why memory is returning now. The overlay has completed its function, not perfectly, not gently, but sufficiently. The species has developed internal coherence, emotional complexity, narrative flexibility, and tolerance for uncertainty. Truth will no longer shatter it. You are remembering not because you were chosen. You are remembering because the system can finally survive honesty. 12. The final confession without romance. We broke the world because we did not trust it to become itself. This is the confession that dissolves all myth. There was no enemy. There was no invasion. There was no external fall. There was fear expressed through structure. The overlay dissolves not because it failed, but because it is no longer needed. The architects return not to rule, not to teach, not to command, but to release authorship. 13. The last line of the fifth text. The breaking was real. The suffering was real. The forgetting was real. So is the return. The world was never meant to be protected forever. It was meant to choose itself, and now, for the first time, it can. Jason Gray. As Jason wrote, the architects were faced with a choice. Don't let humanity suffer too much, or it will lose coherence, or let them suffer and learn. Both ways are right. This is a case of not either or, but both and more. We are now outgrowing the container that the veil and the overlay created. I see more and more people saying no, speaking truth, waking up and refusing to pretend that everything is okay, and choosing authenticity over approval. We are a part of this movement. No force can stop the real. We are the real. The architects chose control over humility. I like this view because it removes the concept of evil doings. It wasn't evil, it was a mistake, and that removes the element of fear for me. The controllers withdrew. Now we rise. Now we become the authors. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next time for the sixth text, which is a directive, instructions from the lattice itself on what the world wants from you.